also if I overuse it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Warlick. I'm the Vice President for Defense, AFCEA International. And I want to welcome you to the Build Theater. This is the last in a great series of sessions over the past couple of days, presented by DISA primarily. And this session today does qualify for continuing education credits, which is a good thing. All you need to do is get your badge scanned on the way out at the end of the session, but you need to stay to the end of the session. You can't leave early because you got to have an hour block of time to get this credit. But the reason you get this credit's available is because this session is going to be very important in general to all of us. The title today is Privileged User Management. And what you're going to get more than I'm probably going to describe here, but you're going to have an overview of what a virtual desktop infrastructure is and how DISA uses that structure for their privileged users to address information and security vulnerabilities. So that's a mouthful. So I'm sure you're going to have some questions for them, and they certainly expect that. Now, your speaker today is Richard Abrams, and Richard is the Infrastructure Services Chief for the Applications Division at DISA. Just a little bit of background on Richard. He focuses on leading a team of experts, some are with him today, who focus on delivering identity and access management solutions for the DISA enterprise. He also has the responsibilities of delivering the centralized authentication service for servers across the DISA enterprise. And he's the lead for a number of other areas that I'm sure he'll describe here as he gets into his presentation today. So without further ado, I welcome Richard Abrams.
So as he said, my name is Rich Abrams, and just a couple of administrative things up front. I do welcome questions at any point. Don't feel that you have to wait until the end to ask questions or just jump up, ask your question, and we'll address it at the time. You don't have to wait until the end. The second thing is that as was just described, while we were originally talking about VDI only, we wanted to talk or add a few more concepts to make sure we gave a holistic perspective and view of what we're doing within the enterprise in order to secure our infrastructure. So while we will talk about the virtual desktop infrastructure, we're also going to talk about how we have improved our security through strong authentication and centralized management of our user community with regard to privileged users. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. This slide here represents how our environment was prior to some of the changes that we've made with our virtual desktop infrastructure. And what we're really going to do is start on the left-hand side and talk about how a privileged user would access our environment in past, what they would go through, the process they would go through, and then the next slide is the evolution of that and how we've introduced VDI to address some of that. So on a side note, this is the first time that I've really gotten to use a pointer, so I'm probably going to overuse this throughout the entire brief. So on the left side where you see the privileged user, that privileged user would log into their normal desktop. And when they log in, they CAC, however they log into their local desktop. Once they're logged in and they're actually on Nipper, they would then go to our OOB out-of-band virtual access point to actually try to get into our infrastructure. Now, when they log into that point, that desktop that they were coming in on was a part of our infrastructure. So in other words, they were receiving an IP address, they were coming in, and they were a part of our infrastructure. So as we kind of looked at that as an agency across the board, we realized that we were opening ourselves to a lot of security vulnerabilities and risk, because when you think about it, at different points, even your but your government furnished equipment that you may have has been quarantined in your agency because it wasn't patched properly or something occurred on that on that particular desktop. And when that happens, your agency may quarantine it. But if it's not happening real time, in a case where you're coming into our environment, we're allowing you, because we weren't scanning the desktop, we weren't validating that patches were being applied, because the management of those desktops was primarily the responsibility of that agency. So what we looked at and what we thought about is that we were, in fact, introducing systems into our infrastructure that was causing us to be exposing ourselves to a high degree of risk because of improperly patched systems. We could be introducing malware. Think about any of the things that can come along with a system that was not patched properly. And that's, in essence, what we were introducing to our data center. And so because of that, we ended up coming up with a solution, a virtual desktop infrastructure solution that would allow us to mitigate a lot of those risks. This next slide really represents the high level of our VDI infrastructure and how folks are now gaining access to our environment. So we're going to step through this slide from top to bottom, where you see the actual privileged user at top, and then talk about how a user now accesses our environment based on the changes that we put in place and the improvement in security based on those changes. So the first thing is that a user will still log into their local desktop. That has not changed. A user logs into their local desktop, they gain access to NIPRNet, and once they're on Nipper, they have on their desktop a client that allows them to launch it, and that client then connects them to the VDI infrastructure. And once they're connected to the VDI infrastructure, they get a window on their desktop similar to a remote connection, if you're familiar with that. It's just a window that shows that virtual desktop within your desktop window. Once that's exposed, that user is then able to log into any of the servers inside of the out-of-band network. So effectively, we have eliminated the idea of adding a desktop that has been improperly patched or managed or potentially patched or managed into our infrastructure by simply deploying that virtual desktop infrastructure. Now, in addition to deploying that, in addition to having that available, one of the things that we did was introduce what we call the Enterprise Access Portal. Now, the purpose of that is really to eliminate the ability for our privileged users to directly transfer files or data into our data center. Before, when they were adding their system through the VPN to our local network, they were able to just simply drag and drop. They were able to take a file and drop it onto our network, whether it was a script, whether it was a file, whatever it may have been, they could do that. And we had no way of actually monitoring that transition of that file. We had no way of knowing exactly what was occurring. And so what we did was come up with the Enterprise Access Portal solution, and that solution is designed much similar to VDI, where it has two separate interfaces. One interface is connected to Nipper, the other interface is connected to the out-of-band network. And so when a user is connecting on Nipper, as long as they have a VDI account, they can drop that file on that Enterprise Access Portal. Then what happens on the backside of that is they log in using their VDI account. They're able to go directly to that Enterprise Access Portal, take that file, and drop it on the server. The reverse of that is also true. If there is a file, maybe it's a log file that we need to share with one of our vendors, one of our partners, instead of it just being captured and moved out to the internet, we now have a way to not only monitor that movement of the file, but actually scan that data as it's coming into or out of our environment. So from a security standpoint, we've solved a lot of the challenges that we were concerned about surrounding introducing laptops, desktops into our environment that may not have been properly patched. In addition to that, we also addressed some of the concerns surrounding centralized management of how people were coming in and out of our environment. So when we came out with that virtual desktop infrastructure, we now have the ability, one thing I didn't mention is that we have the ability to patch those images and deploy those images throughout the enterprise. So we don't have to worry any longer about systems being introduced to our environment that have not been properly patched. We also have the ability, because it's a virtual appliance, that once that system is been shut down, we're not concerned about anything that may have occurred on that desktop because you get a fresh desktop every time you start it back up. So that's really the benefits and highlights of having that virtual infrastructure where we're able to patch it. We have that centralized management. We know that you actually have to have an account because we control that. And in addition, we're able to quickly deploy the tools that are required for our privileged users into that environment. So having that centralized ability has improved our ability to provide the services and capabilities that our administrators need throughout the enterprise. This next slide is probably one of the most challenging things that we're facing as an organization. It really highlights one of the major challenges that we had with regard to administration and authentication of accounts within our enterprise. So we have that privileged user that's sitting in the middle of that slide. Now that privileged user today has to have an account on every system or every domain that they maintain or that they are responsible for. In this example up here, what you see on the left-hand side is the Windows domain. So this particular privileged user does not administer anything within the Windows domain. Now, within the Windows standalone servers and the Windows servers, the keys that you see represented here represent a unique account for that administrator that has to be added to that local system. That's how our infrastructure was working. And so when you take into consideration that this is just one administrator that has 6 accounts within our enterprise on 6 different systems, that becomes a management nightmare for any organization. And to further illustrate that point, we have tens of thousands of administrators across our enterprise. So when you think about the fact that in just this example, we have 6. We have folks that may have 10 accounts. Some may have 3, some may only have 2. But we have across the enterprise a issue or a challenge that we had to address to eliminate having one person being represented by multiple accounts. Now, another challenge that this actually illustrates is the way that we were administering each one of these particular servers was expecting the organization to manage it themselves. We were simply trusting that each one of these 6 organizations was going to know automatically that a user's permission had changed, or maybe they left the organization, or maybe their privileges had been revoked. Our expectation as an agency was that the system administrator who is responsible for a non-Windows server in an environment is going to know that some military personnel PCS'd or they may have left the organization altogether. The reality of that is slim to none. And so because of that, we were left with a lot of stagnant accounts sitting on top of servers inside of our enterprise. So one of the things that we knew we had to do up front with our solution or our approach to addressing that was come up with something where we could reduce the number of accounts. We knew we had challenges where each system owner was maintaining their own environment. They were responsible for adding the accounts. They were responsible for the authentication within that environment. And then they had to make sure across the board that they were deleting accounts from every single server. That was just too much of a management nightmare for anyone. And at a higher level, our seniors took a look at that and said, this is just not going to work. We need to make changes. And those changes really surrounded not only the reduction of accounts, but also the securing of those platforms. we actually had systems in our environment that were relying on username and password as a means to authenticate a user. While we have our director talking about the advancements and the things that he wants us to be focusing on, the leaning forward, we were in our environment having systems that leverage username and password. So as you can imagine, he was extremely excited about that when he heard about that, and made a mandate that we eliminated the dependency on name and password within the next couple of months, actually. So what we did was come up with a solution that allowed us to consolidate a lot of that. The solution that we came up with is called the Enterprise Privileged User Service, but we have a central directory called the Enterprise Privileged User Forest that now contains all of the accounts across the enterprise for privileged users. So every privileged user across the enterprise will be located in this directory only. Now, based on that, we were, going back to that previous slide that we had where we showed 6 different accounts being represented for that one user. In our new solution, we're able to delete 5 of those accounts across the environment, and that user now only has 1 account, and that 1 account is in that central enterprise privilege user forest. The next step that we really had to do is figure out how we were going to ensure that all of the local servers and systems were able to leverage that central authentication service. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight here is that we did not take over the authorization capability for the servers. In other words, when you think about identity management, there's the management of identities, there's the authentication, and there's the authorization side to IDAM, or Identity and Access Management. What we were doing was addressing the identity issues and the authentication issues. The authorization still resides with our mission partners and still resides with the system owners. But going back to what I was saying, we knew we had to ensure that all of our environments were able to leverage our new enterprise privileged user forest. So we had to create trust between our domains. A one-way trust has been established. These green lines that you see right here and the second one right there identify the one-way trust associated to our Windows forest and domains so that they can actually leverage the enterprise privileged user forest. Now, those one-way trusts are great for Windows domains, but when you think about the fact that we had standalone servers in our environment and we also had non-Windows servers in our environment, we had to come up with an approach to address those as well. So within our solution, what we ended up doing was for all of our Windows servers, all of those standalone Windows servers that we had within our environment, we were actually able to join them to this new enterprise service and resource forest to ensure that they were able to leverage that one-way account. Now, anyone who knows non-Windows servers understands that they cannot natively be joined to an Active Directory forest. So we had to leverage a third-party solution to interface with our Active Directory domain and the non-Windows servers. So we have to deploy an agent on the server, and we have a management console inside of the Enterprise Services Forest that allows us to seamlessly join those non-Windows servers to that to the Enterprise Service Resource Forest. So with this particular model and this particular slide, what we effectively did was we eliminated the use of username and password across the enterprise because our enterprise service and enterprise privileged user forest actually uses alt tokens. So all of our mission partners, our agency as well, deployed alt tokens for every privileged user. So when that alt token was received, they were registered in that enterprise privileged user forest, and as a result, we no longer have systems in the enterprise that leverage username and password. Because effectively what we have been doing over the last couple of months is once a user is registered, we've gone to that local system, local domain, and we've deleted that local account. And traditional Windows, the way that it flows and the way that it works is that it's going to look in the local system first. If it does not find your account in the local system, it will move on to the domain. If it doesn't find it within the domain, it would look within the one-way trust that's established. We have a question?
How are you handling service accounts?
How are we handling service accounts? That's actually a good question. Service accounts are outside of user accounts. So the service accounts will still remain local to the system. We have not made any change to the service account themselves. Now, we're monitoring them different. We're registering them differently, but we've not made any change to the service account on the local system. Before I move on, any other questions? Okay. So based on this, we knew that we had a solution that was addressing the challenges that we face from a user standpoint, from the account management, from the number of accounts that we had within the enterprise, and then finally from the use of username and password within our enterprise. So we were able to accomplish getting rid of a number of accounts. In fact, we've deleted over 50,000 accounts within the enterprise already today. Now, we still have a lot of work to do, but in general, the idea that we had 50,000 duplicate accounts that were represented by a small pool of users was astonishing. But through the work of a lot of good people, we've been able to actually reduce those numbers by 50,000 already. This next slide actually represents the culmination of the privileged user experience, highlighting the virtual desktop infrastructure and the ePUF environment and authentication that's taking place today. So when you look at this slide, the way that it kind of flows is still from left to right, where you see the privileged user on the left-hand side. What's occurring is that privileged user, in order to gain access to the resources or to the servers within their environment, is going to log into that virtual desktop. Using that icon on their desktop, they're going to initiate that virtual desktop, and then they have a second interface on that virtual desktop that allows them to connect into the servers. Now, when they go and try to connect into the server, we automatically know that we have extracted the authentication from that local environment and placed it within the ePUF environment. So when that user tries to authenticate, they're really authenticating against that ePUF environment, and that local server, local domain, or local non-Windows server is trusting that authentication that occurs within the ePUF environment. Any questions about this particular diagram? Okay. This next slide really represents the benefits that we've kind of talked about, or that I've talked about throughout the brief. I'm not going to go through each one of them individually, but I'll highlight a couple of them. As an example, for our mission partners, we've actually been able to centralize management of desktops, applications, and accounts across the enterprise. The fact that we were able to mitigate the risks that were exposed, the fact that we were able to streamline our processes and ensure that our mission partners had a central desktop, a clean central desktop to manage their systems, where we were reducing the exposure for our internal systems and servers, was a big win for us. From an end user standpoint, we were able to improve the user experience by providing the uniform connectivity from any location. So now, anywhere within Nipper, you're able to access your VDI client and be able to be productive and actually hit the servers that you manage. From an operational management standpoint, I've kind of harped on this a little bit, but we're incredibly happy about the fact that we're able to patch systems before they're able to touch our servers or in many cases, our mission partner servers. We have a solution in place today that is now able to patch all of our servers, all of the desktops across the enterprise prior to them touching our servers. And then finally, from a security standpoint, we actually have reduced our risk. If you think about the elimination of username and password, adding strong authentication within the enterprise, where we are now having all of our users using alt tokens instead of name and password or some other means of authentication, not forcing the local system administrator to come up with their own way of securing their desktop, not having a situation where we are just expecting everyone to come up with their own method, and creating a standardized way to ensure that we're authenticating our folks, that we're providing that strong authentication across the enterprise, and ultimately creating an environment where we have the ability to recover real quick. So with our virtual desktop infrastructure, we have that resiliency put in place. We have the COOP in place so that if an environment fails or something goes down, we can easily switch the workload and ensure that our users are still able to be productive. So barring any questions that you may have, that really concludes the presentation that I have in terms of the virtual desktop infrastructure and our enterprise privilege user authentication service that we have deployed. So any additional questions? Well, I certainly appreciate y'all stopping by to hear about some of the changes that we've made within the enterprise. We'll be hanging out. I'm actually a little disappointed, to be honest, because I was hoping that the folks up here got some really, really tough, challenging questions that maybe they weren't able to answer. So if you want to ask a hard question, please feel free to come up, because I feel like they have not been used to the fullest. So feel free to stop up and ask any questions that you may have about the briefing. Thank you and have a great day. I'm so glad to be done with that.
Richard, thank you very much for that presentation. It was under an hour, so we're not going to be able to authorize continuing education credits unless you can start asking questions and we can sit here. And I suspect that many of you would like that. So I think it would behoove you to do that. I'd be happy to facilitate that for you. But I think there's lots of questions out here that you could continue to pursue. So you may want to have another part of a presentation that you might want to add on to what you had also to Richard as well. But again, it's up to you. If you'd like to stay here for this, we need to have the questions to keep this going forward. And I see the first question coming up.
Are these mics on? Are these mics pushed on?
Yeah, I just have one. If you back up a couple slides to where you're managing it, who administers the servers? I guess one more slide back. So that's the server that is passing from the non-Windows server. You need a solution. So how does that get administered, I guess is my question.
So if I understand you correctly, you're asking about the non-Windows solution.
Yeah, you're managing that through, I guess, in the center there between the Windows servers and the non-Windows server, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a third-party solution that has been deployed that acts on behalf of that non-Windows server. And so there's an agent that sits on the non-Windows server that allows it to understand the information that's coming from that Active Directory domain.
Got it. Okay. And that also establishes trust back to the Windows domain, if I understand you correctly.
It doesn't actually establish a trust.
Yeah.
So the trust is established from domain to domain, or forest to forest.
Okay.
So those green arrows that you see right there are the one-way trust that's established between the enterprise service and resource forest and the enterprise privilege user forest.
Got it. Okay.
That's the trust.
Okay.
And so what that third-party solution is doing, though, is it's actually taking that non-Windows box and it's joining it to that enterprise service and resource forest.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay.
One point what I hope is constructive criticism. There's a term that I see in here on, I think it was a previous slide.
Okay.
There's actually an Army policy out about standalone information systems. And so when I see standalone servers up there with network connections, that's not the definition of a standalone. So that term is overloaded. Okay, so I'm just telling you a little bit of confusion arose from that.
Sure.
So, second thing, and this is a question: does this solution give me a cross operating system capability? In other words, can I be a user on a Windows platform, for instance, and get access to do code development on a Mac?
So the first part of your question, or first part of your comment, was surrounding the standalone servers, right? And so you were concerned about the fact that the use of the term standalone?
Just terminology. Just be aware that if there's Army folks seeing this, their heads are exploding because you can't do this with a standalone server using the Army definition of what is standalone. I think your definition of standalone means it's not part of a domain controller.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what standalone means.
But there is an Army document out there that defines what standalone information system is, and that ain't it.
Yeah.
That's my only point.
So certainly understand. And so when it comes to the terms that are used across the enterprise, I think we all kind of know that there's 1,000,001 terms to describe the same thing. And so definitely, if there are any Army folks in the audience that may understand the term standalone differently, my application of standalone simply means it's not joined to a Windows domain. Thank you for that clarity. But the second part of your question surrounded our virtual desktop infrastructure. And so you wanted to know if it was allowing the ability to do
cross-operating system. In other words, can I have a user who's, for instance, off in my infrastructure somewhere on a Windows box that needs to do development that's going to be supported on iOS? Would this environment be able to provide that kind of capability, or vice versa? If he's sitting on an iOS and he needs to do development on an Android development platform that resides on Windows, would this solution be able to provide that for him?
So I'm going to call a friend on that one. Joel?
Is this on? Okay. So the way that VDI is structured, there's an individual firewall for each individual desktop. So when you log in as your account, you are logging in and you get access to certain servers and you get access to certain applications based on your individual access. So in your case, you've described a developer access. In this case, you're going to get access to a specific set of servers, specifically a specific set of IP addresses, and the applications to connect to those and administer those different servers. So that's the way it's structured today. So if you did need to get access to an additional set of servers in this circumstance, you'd be able to do that, but the desktop itself is Windows 10. So it's a Windows 10 only desktop and applications that reside and work on that platform.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Not sure if you're going to be able to talk about this one. So have you deployed this in your DMZs?
So it is, I can say it is deployed and operational today. Where it's deployed and how it's deployed, I'm not able to go into that level of detail, but it is, everything that you've seen up here today is operational within our computing centers.
This may be too simple, but it's one that I think is worth talking about. A CAC card versus a token. Or maybe you're classifying them both the same way, I'm not quite sure. But from the identity side of where we're going, what do you see as the possible direction that may be the school solution for access?
Hello? Yeah. So with the CAT card, when two-factor authentication was mandated through Cybercom, a lot of people were using CAT cards because it was two-factor. But that did not eliminate that you have credentials lying stored on the desktop that you were utilizing. And with that being there, it was potential risk that you can get a hold of those credentials, even though if you didn't have the PIN, but you could get the certificate that was on the underlying operating system being stored. So with the alternate token, it's a totally separate set of credentials that does not look and feel like anything like the credentials on a CAT card. So by separating that even further, that gives us the advantage in case something did happen to that certificate from the CAT card. But way forward, having a separate, totally set of credentials that's separate from what you're using, from surfing the web to checking email, that is the way to go. And that's why we implemented that in the solution that we have today.
Any other questions?
This may be far afield of where you are right now with the identity management, but elsewhere in the conference they brought up the biometrics and keystrokes and things like that. How might that affect when you look at the access and identity management associated with VDI? How might that change when you look at the virtual desktop? And if you bring in the aspect of the keyboard into the identity management, how would that impact how you've got things set up for VDI?
Once again, we'll phone a friend.
So that's an interesting question. Obviously, today, we have our current level of implementation, and I think there was a question about the DMZ and accessing this administrative network from the outside. So I think it's definitely there's a lot of other options from biometrics and different technologies that can validate who the individual is. So from my standpoint, we've talked notionally about some of these different technologies, but it's really going to be what I call an authorizing official decision on whether they're going to allow those technologies and allow people to access certain networks from certain other locations. So that's more of I'll call it a bigger picture question that's definitely out of my pay grade. But there are a lot of technologies that are making identification of users a lot more specific and accessible. So it'd be interesting to see how that comes along the line. But at this point in time, I'm not aware of anything in that direction at this point in time.
How closely are you working with the services for this solution?
So we're working very close with the services. In fact, we actually have routine meetings, 101 briefings, overviews. There's a lot going on in a short amount of time. So our focus has really been to make sure that not only are we putting the information out there for our mission partners and the different services, but they're actively engaged. So as we move different components out or portions of our infrastructure out, we've ensured that they are a part of the early adopters and early testers to make sure that we get that buy-in, because what we don't want to do as an agency is just put a solution out there and say, you must use it, and it's not meeting the operational needs of those organizations. So we have worked closely with the agencies to ensure we're addressing those needs.
I want to echo and get maybe a little bit more detail on a question asked earlier. So when you say a separate resource from that's not available in a Windows system, let's say I'm trying to access a PDF on a Linux box. If I wanted to FTP to pick that up, is what I want to make sure I understand. So if I FTP and I log into the FTP server to pull the PDF back to the Windows box, that means that it actually goes back and checks my access privileges on the Active Directory rather than the LDAP that's on the Linux box. Is that what's happening here?
I didn't catch all that. I couldn't hear.
So as it relates to, and this is actually a good slide to kind of talk about that. So when we're dealing with file transfer into or out of the environment, that's a separate solution. That's not going through the VDI infrastructure. So when a user is trying to transfer a file into or out of the environment, what they're actually leveraging is the enterprise access portal. And so when they, in the example that you were mentioning, they want to take a file out of the data center, whether it's a PDF, whether it's a log file, whatever it may be. They're going to log into their VDI desktop, and they'll access the server. The authentication that takes place is through that environment that you're kind of describing. But the file transfer itself actually occurs through the EAP, or Enterprise Access Portal. So that user who's logged into a VDI session, they see that server, they're logged into that server, they're authenticated to that server, they grab that file and they drop it on the Enterprise Access Portal. Once that file is located there, then from Nipper, they're able to they can go from their desktop and go to, as long as they actually have a VDI account, they're able to go to that Enterprise Access Portal, grab that file, and move it wherever they need to.
Okay, so I made up that use case to try to get a specific answer to the question, which was, can you give me examples of non-Windows resources that you need to access from the Windows system?
So it's not so much a non-Windows resource that you need to access. We have thousands of servers that are non-Windows inside of our data center. In order to gain access to those boxes today, or based on history, they would just simply log into the network, and from their Windows box, they would SSH or whatever they were using to get to that box, right? So what we've done to eliminate them from introducing that system that may have issues or vulnerabilities on it is that we are having everyone leverage that virtual desktop infrastructure. And similar to the desktop that you would be going in on, instead of going directly from a Windows box to a non-Windows box, Unix, Linux, whatever it may be, you're going to SSH to that box. So we have clients on that VDI platform that allow you to connect into that non-Windows box to administer it.
Okay, so rather than SSHing, you have software on the box, or
so we have PuTTY, we have other utilities on the desktop that allow you to connect it. The same administrative tools that you would do from a normal Windows box to connect in to administer those systems will be within that VDI environment.
Got it. That was the use case I needed. And can you mention the vendor that provided the integration between Active Directory and...
I'm sure the vendor is here and would be happy to talk to you afterwards, but I personally can't, vendor name drop up here.
Okay.
But the vendor is here and would be happy to probably meet you in the back and talk to you about things.
I'll stand back there with my hand raised. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I need a couple more really, really hard VDI. Yes, Todd.
This was pretty simple. So if I'm a DBA, an EA, enterprise admin, am I using the same alt token? Am I the same person in your system?
Yes. You're the same across the board.
Can you talk a little bit more about how that works? Is it role-based? Is that?
Yes. Okay. So, I'm sorry? So, absolutely. So, all administrators are represented by one account. There's no difference between how an account is created or registered. What ultimately ends up happening is within Active Directory itself, we created groups and roles, and we've pushed the management of those groups and roles out to the administrators, the server administrators, the ones who know who should have rights to that system. So as an agency or as a PMO, we're not actually, as I mentioned earlier, responsible for the authorization portion. In other words, we're not determining as an agency for a mission partner who is allowed to access their systems. What we've done within Active Directory is create a model that allows us to define who from their agency is going to make those sort of determinations, and they would be responsible for adding certain users into groups that are predefined that allow them to manage the different roles that Todd was speaking to. You want to add on that? Any other questions? Any hard VDI questions out there?
about 15 more minutes.
This audience better get with it. What is your rollout schedule? What do you see as the next 2-3 years that as the focus of what you talked on today? What does it look like in terms of a timeline to build on the universal network, I should say, I guess, for within DISA?
So I wish I had 2 to 3 years to roll this out, but the reality of it is I've got months to roll this out. So we actually, from an organizational standpoint, we are going to be finalizing our deployment for our non-Windows systems within the next 30 days. And we're going to start joining those systems or actively joining those systems within the next 30 days. We expect to have that completed. So from a timeline standpoint, the forward-leaning and forward-thinking is how do we evolve the environment? What are the changes that we need to make? Are there any things that we can do from an organizational standpoint or a PMO to look at some of the things that the general has talked about with regard to biometrics and things along those lines? So we'll be looking at things like that, but once we have this deployed, we're really in a place of really maintaining it and keeping it sustained. Yes, sir.
So if I understand you correctly, you've deployed a non-persistent VDI solution. How have you addressed DAR, data at rest?
So as was mentioned, we have a non-persistent environment. So from an end-user perspective, you log on, you do your work during the day. When you log off, that desktop is essentially destroyed, right? So that desktop gets deleted. If there is any malware, any bad actor entities on there, it gets destroyed and gets recreated. So every time you log in, you have a fresh desktop. So from a data at rest perspective, it's actually handled from a pure infrastructure standpoint. So from our standpoint, you have the operating system, which is the primary focus, ensuring the data at rest today. So there's inherent things within the Windows 10 Secure OS baseline, which is the DoD CIO standard, but at the hardware infrastructure layer is where we handle the data at rest.
So you're doing DAR on the SAN using hardware encryption.
So we're not using a SAN. So we haven't talked to the kind of the innards or infrastructure aspects of things. But we're actually using a hyper-converged solution as part of that. So although we do have a SAN architecture at the DEC, that's not what we leverage for this for the VDI implementation.
So you've been talking about the way you're going to deploy this out, that you've got a process in place for Windows and non-Windows privileged users to be able to get an eBuff account. Would you please talk a little bit on how that process works so that people that aren't familiar with how they would go about applying and who needs to apply would go through that, both for Windows and for non-Windows, from a process point of view?
Sure.
Thank you.
Major?
From a process point of view, we typically point users or mission partners, whoever needs the service, to a one-on-one brief. And within a one-on-one brief, it gives them like 4 easy steps to go through to become part of the environment. And it's basically forms are filled out and signed, just like any other account within DoD, SAR form. Basically, you have a need to get an account. Everyone approves it, and this gets signed and shipped up the chain of command. And then it gets emailed to our central accounts creations team, and what they do from there is provision accounts based on what's on that form. And that's all documented within a idle-based ticketing system where it gets assigned and it's tracked, and users or mission partners know that they have someone's working that, and they get a ticket number along with that. Once all that is closed out, the account is created, and they have alternate tokens that match the accounts. What we point them to is a testing process to validate that account is working. We have systems out in our environment that we point them to and say, go on out there and make sure you can log in. If you can't log in, let us know so we can get that corrected. Once they have tested their account and everything's good to go, we typically have a ticket opened up and assigned to the team that they're working with in our data centers. That's usually like the server line of business that we have in DISA. That system administrator in the server line of business then takes that account and gives it authorization to the systems that they need access to, whether it's server access, application access, or database access. That is all handled by the server line of business. And once that's done, and everyone's happy that they can get access to the resources that they needed, that account, the old account that they were using is then deleted, and then they only use the EPUF account they were provisioned for. Hope that answered your question. Is that a long time?
Just for anyone who does have a CAC or has ability to log on a NIPR, we do have a public-facing, NIPRNet-facing site that you're able to go to, and it's the steps that he described are really 4 different steps.
Yep.
And those 4 unique steps that you have to follow are spelled out step by step. So if there's someone in the audience that's a mission partner or you need additional information about the process that you have to go through in order to request the token or request an account, those steps are defined there. You're able to log on. You're able to get the information. You're able to contact our support desk if, in fact, you need help at any step along the way. We do have mailboxes that are listed there as well that you can send information to. We've become the central belly button for all things EPAWS, for all things regarding the enterprise privileged user authentication service that we have deployed. And so if there is a question and you're unsure about how to get an answer, the main thing is to send an email to our support team, and we will be up here following, and we'll be happy to give you that email account in order to make sure that we get and field the questions that you may have or the issues and challenges you may be having. Yes, sir.
Have you done performance analysis on like last mile to the endpoint to determine what the user experience is and what the minimum capacity is at the endpoint for performance of the VDI solution?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we do. One, we actually have a monitoring tool set that's from an end user perspective. So every one that uses VDI has a agent essentially that's running on their physical desktop, their physical laptop, however they're accessing VDI. And so there is actually monitoring from the endpoint. So we understand if there's any type of latency, and we can actually see the communication back and forth between the servers that are housing the VDI desktops and the endpoints of the end user. So it does give us a good perspective on that. Traditionally that's one of the bigger challenges, making sure that we have the right tool sets for that. In addition to that, from a pure infrastructure comm standpoint, we have also conducted an analysis for our current set of users to take a look at the amount of resources that is required and the bandwidth that's required per desktop at the different sites that we have. So we engaged one of our internal teams within DISA to provide that analysis back. As we look to deploy VDI, or if we look to deploy VDI outside of our major data centers, that obviously that analysis would have to be expanded, as most of our, or really all of our data centers where we have privileged users are all CONUS right now. There are a very scattered few that are OCONUS, but at this point in time, it's not a huge number of resources at this point in time that would have a huge impact.
Does this architecture currently exist also on SIPR? And if not, is that in the plans?
So from a SIPR standpoint, we are deploying that. It's planned out, and we are in the phase where we're rolling a lot of the architecture out as we speak. Any other?
From a hardware or a software point of view, are there any conditions that must be in place in order for the solution to work, and anything that mission partners should be sensitive to as being something that could be a hard spot for them if it's in their environment already? For example, active client. Is there a particular level at which active client has to be utilized for it to work? And I'm mentioning this only because if you've got a couple of hard spots that would flag, it might help mission partners and other highly technical educated users to say, I have a potential issue and I should contact your team.
Yes.
Could you outline out what some of those might be?
Sure. What I can do is let you know that we do have challenges with as the question just pointed out, we have challenges with certain things like active client. Right? We know that we have certain issues where you have to be at a certain level in order for the solution to work, just like with any software or any technology that's deployed. Right? Now, we have a knowledge base internal to the SharePoint site. We have folks that are prepared to help address the migration of users and of systems. And one of the things that I encourage everyone to do if you're in an environment where you need support or you need help is to make sure you reach out immediately, because we have the support personnel in place to make sure that it's a smooth transition for you, or as smooth as it possibly can be, because anytime you're changing from one technology to another, there's going to be bumps along the way. But we've done a really, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we've done, I guess it is, we've done a really good job of kind of getting a lot of things done in a short window of time. We've had really good support from our leadership. And the thing that I can't stress enough is don't do it on your own. I mean, we've got the experts in-house to help with the transition. Make sure you reach out with any questions or any challenges or any concerns that you have before it becomes a gotcha. And we absolutely know that there are some limitations, and those limitations are within our knowledge base. So if you have questions about that, you're certainly welcome to look at those and or reach out directly to us following the brief. Again, make sure you have an email point of contact so you can ask. Yes, sir.
Can you speak a little bit about multi-layer security solutions that you're implementing in a VDI environment like AFRL's Secure View solution, for example?
Can you repeat the question? There was a little bit of background noise. I apologize.
So I'm asking about multi-layer security solutions like AFRL's Secure View, where you're basically running VMs and multiple networks into one piece of one network. You understand?
Yep, I do. Yeah, I'm aware of, there's definitely some different technologies that allow, from a VDI perspective, to allow access to different networks. At this point in time, we are a single network implementation. So I definitely am aware of the different technologies, but we are not, at this point in time, looking at deploying those for this particular VDI solution.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Just a question about VDI. What's it going to look like, look and feel in terms of comms and capabilities compared to what my DISA, I guess, desktop looks like?
Sure. So from a end user perspective, it should look just like your current Windows 10 today. So if you have a Windows 10 desktop, I mean, that's basically what you're going to see. So as Rich talked about earlier, you're basically you get a window, and inside of it is a desktop, a Windows 10 desktop that resides inside of it. So, from my perspective, the easiest thing to do is if you've got two monitors, right, then you can have, your physical desktop on your left-hand side. On your right-hand side, you can have your virtual desktop. And so one of the use cases that we talked about earlier with EAP, you could go ahead and log in with your physical desktop and upload a file. And then from your VDI desktop, you can then, in your other window, in your other monitor, you can pull it down. But the look and the feel is exactly the same. I think the only big delta or difference is that if you start seeing, there was a question before about latency and monitoring. If you start seeing latency in VDI, if you have more than about 125 milliseconds of latency, then you start seeing, I'll call it choppiness, where your mouse kind of jumps a little bit. And so that's really one of the big impacts to VDI. If you don't have good throughput, then you can have those type of interruptions, which obviously hurts the user experience. By the end of the day, the look and the feel is just a Windows 10 desktop.
But in terms of capability, like email, chat, anything like that, I mean, is that all kind of locked down, or what are you guys doing?
So that's a good question. So for this particular implementation, then that is not accessible, since this specific solution is really just for the administrative network, the out-of-band network. So it's very limited what you can do within the environment. Okay. It's really just for access to the servers themselves. Okay. And the
So no word processing at all? Like, what if I wanted to do some basic document editing, things like that?
So yes. So I mean, so we have, depending on your needs, there are different applications for Microsoft Office and Notepad and that sort of thing. So based on your needs, we have those different applications. But as far as your traditional access to the internet, NIPRNet access, I'm sorry, your email, your service email, those different types of things are not going to be available.
Okay. So accessing depths, would that also be probably not allowed?
So you will not have access to depths from the out-of-band network.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for your team being up here. I want to thank the audience also. You've been persistent, and that's fantastic. I want to make a couple remarks as you walk out. First of all, you will get scanned on the way out. That's a good thing.